Vasistha continued, mind is only perception, and perception is movement in consciousness. So we're exploring mind here, and here it's being defined as perception. And perception is movement in consciousness. And what this means is just the attention again, the attention being caught up in the objects of perception. That's the movement in consciousness. It's the attention moving from one thing to another. It could be from that wall, that camera, that guitar. That's the movement in consciousness we're talking about. The expression of this movement is action, and fruition follows this. So once we perceive something, we've got a reaction to it, and that's called action. And that's got an action has got consequences. It leads from one thing to the other. The consequence here is the attention goes to something else. Mind is an intention arising in the omnipotent and infinite consciousness. This mind isn't separate from the Absolute. It's something which arises within the Absolute. It stands between the real and the unreal, as it were, but inclined towards comprehension. This attention can go onto objects, that's comprehension, whereby it comprehends things, or it can go back to itself. So with this attention, we've got possibilities. We've got the possibility of moving the attention onto itself, which is we're liberated then from all notions of self and world. So the attention itself stands between the real and the unreal. It moves on to the unreal when it's caught up with the objects of perception. But we have got the choice of bringing it back to itself. But the tendency is towards comprehension. Though non-different from the infinite consciousness, it thinks that it is. Though non-doing, it thinks it does. The mind doesn't actually do anything, but it thinks it does. It's only consciousness that does anything. Such is the mind, and these qualities are inseparable from the mind. Even so, the jiva and the mind are inseparable. So when the mind is getting caught up in objects of perception, the notion of an individual self arises within that. That's the jiva. Whatever the mind thinks of, the organs of action strive to materialize. Hence, again, mind is action. So here, mind is being described as action. It's what drives us on. Once it perceives something, it starts acting in relation to these perceptions. However, mind, intellect, egotism, individualized consciousness, action, fancy, birth and death, latent tendencies, knowledge, effort, memory, the senses, nature, maya or illusion, activity, and such other words are but words without corresponding reality. The sole reality is the infinite consciousness in which these concepts are conceived to exist. So there we go. All these concepts have arisen when, by accidental coincidence, the crow dislodging the coconut, the infinite consciousness in a moment of self-forgetfulness viewed itself as the object of perception. Yeah, the question is, well, why have we made this mistake? Why are we not perceiving everything as infinite consciousness? Why are we not appreciating everything as infinite consciousness? There's no reason. It's just so happened. It's a coincidence. Although it's been stated before that you really only appreciate the light once darkness has been removed. If the light's there all the time, then you don't see it. When thus failed by nescience, the same consciousness views diversity in an agitated state and identifies objects as such, it is known as mind. So the agitated state, again, is the attention flitting from one thing to another. This is when it's known as mind. That itself, when it is firmly established in the conviction of a certain perception, is known as intellect or intelligence. When it ignorantly and foolishly identifies itself as an existent separate individual, it's known as egotism. When it abandons consistent inquiry, and that consistent inquiry is bringing the attention back to itself, allowing itself to play with countless thoughts coming and going, it is known as individualized consciousness or mind stuff. So that's a handy paragraph. It lets us know what's meant by mind, what's meant by intellect, neither of which are particularly desirable. It lets us know what egotism is, and it lets us know what's meant by individualized consciousness or mind stuff. Whereas pure movement in consciousness is karma or action without an independent doer, when it pursues the fruition of such action, it is known as karma, action. So pure movement in consciousness is karma or action without an independent doer. This is when the attention is directed to itself and things that are needing to be done are just being done. When it pursues the fruition of action, when action is determined by one's cravings or aversions, then it is known as karma. When it entertains the notion, I have seen this before, in relation to something either seen or unseen, it is known as memory. When the effects of past enjoyments continue to remain in the field of consciousness, though the effects themselves are unseen, it is known as latent tendency or potentiality. When it is conscious of the truth that the vision of division is the product of ignorance, it is known as knowledge. On the other hand, when it moves in the wrong direction towards greater self-forgetfulness and deeper involvement in false fancies, it is known as impurity. When it entertains the indweller with sensations, it is known as the senses, indriya. When it remains unmanifest in the cosmic being, it is known as nature. When it creates confusion between reality and appearance, it is known as maya, illusion. When it dissolves in the infinite, there is liberation. When it thinks, I am bound, there is bondage. When it thinks, I am free, there is freedom. So that's quite a good summary or glossary of terms that are often used. Although this last sentence, when it thinks, I am bound, there is bondage. When it thinks, I am free, there is freedom. That last sentence could be understood in quite a lot of different ways. I think the best way of taking it is to do with a sense of inner realization. And when it thinks I am bound, there is bondage, that's when you realize that your attention is all over the place. And when it thinks I am free, there is freedom, that's when the attention is resting in itself. But there's lots of other ways of understanding that last sentence, which I don't think I'll go into at the moment.